In the 1980s, the Guerrilla Girls were asked to design a billboard for the Public Art Fund in New York City. They were, and still are, an anonymous artist activist group that focuses on exposing gender and ethnic bias and corruption seen in art, film, politics, and pop culture. In an interview, they said, "We stand for the conscience of the art world, and we feel there is an underrepresentation of women and minorities." With this project, they wanted to appeal to a general audience. They went straight to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and counted the number of women artists in the exhibition and compared it with the number of female nudes in the artwork. The Public Art Fund then rejected their designs as a billboard because they said it was not clear enough. Nonetheless, they decided to run their work as ads in the New York City buses, and they recounted their original study in 2004 and in 2011. In 1989, less than 5% of the artists were women, but 85% of the nudes were female. In 2004, 15 years later, less than 3% of the artists were women, but 83% of the nudes were female. In 2011, 7 years later, less than 4% of the artists were women, but 76% of the nudes were female. In the 22 years since the first study, there is less than a 10% reduction in the amount of nudes that are female. The glorification of the female body is a mentally damaging phenomenon that has been prevalent for hundreds of years. The art we see and are constantly exposed to seem to have a strange parallel between the glorification of female nudity and the objectification of the actual female body. John Berger's second episode of Ways of Seeing further explores this culture. Art is a record of the culture we live in, and in centuries of European paintings, we witness how women were seen. We can see how they were perceived and how they were judged. There is a clear distinction between what a woman's role was in the world versus what a man's role was. A man's value seemed to be determined through his relation to the world around him, whereas a woman's value seemed to be determined through her relation to a man. Berger said, "Men dream of women. Women dream of themselves being dreamt of. Men look at women. Women watch themselves being looked at. A woman is always accompanied, except when alone, but perhaps even then, by her own image of herself." There seems to be this constant consciousness of the way women are being perceived. From very early ages, girls are taught and encouraged to always be aware of how they are presenting themselves. Although this episode was released in 1972, the societal pressures that have instigated issues with body image back then still haunt the women of today. Whether it is in the media we are exposed to or the art we are educated to worship, there are unrealistic and damaging ideas about our bodies that are constantly projected onto us. Take the nude artworks of the European paintings, for example. We see how women were seen. To be naked is to be oneself, but to be nude is to be seen naked by others and yet not recognized for oneself. Berger explains. Nude has to be seen as an object in order for it to be seen as nude. It implies an awareness of a spectator. While naked is to be seen without disguise and has a natural sense of vulnerability, to be nude is to be on display, to have your skin turned into a disguise, but is worse because you're unable to escape it or take it off. The woman is not revealed as herself, but as an object on display. Berger mentions how in the tens of thousands of European nudes, there are only a handful where the artists reveal the women as themselves. An interesting way to differ between nude artworks and works that reveal naked women, in my opinion, it can be in the way that general women react to the work. For example, seeing this piece of this woman revealing herself, I can feel her vulnerability. I connect with her and can identify with her as a human being. However, when I see depictions of women simply in nude or on display, there is a disconnect. I relate to one of the women in the episode who said it felt very unreal in connection with any deep down image I might have of myself or deep down pleasure in looking at another female body. It does not give any kind of pleasure at all. I can admire them as paintings, but they do not mean human beings. I resonated with this when she discussed how the paintings seemed idealized as they exaggerated these secondary sexual characteristics that do not seem real, which makes it impossible to identify with these women. These works are painted to present the idea of what women should look like by the male artist, which further brings about the question that Berger explores. Do these paintings actually celebrate, as we are taught, the woman in them, or the male voyeur? Is there sexuality within the frame or in front of it? The distinctions are very important, yet seem to be lost when the work is passed around and shown to young women, and these girls are sold on false ideas of divinity and womanhood. They are fake and they are not real. They are ideas of human beings and not representations of people with their own selves and individualism and validity. It can be easy to excuse this or brush it off or say that it is different now and this is simply celebrating historical art and you can separate the issue from the artist, but it is a tired excuse. There seems to be some system that rewards and encourages women to be myopic, to not ask questions or challenge the way we should fit into social structures and places, how we should absorb all the media, the films, the educational content that all tell us how to look, how to act, how to treat other women, and constantly be in competition with them to prove that we actually do have worth. Advertisement, business, the film industry, social media have all been constructed in a way that profits off of women as objects, something that needs to be fixed. They have successfully manipulated people into constantly comparing themselves with what they believe is their own images and ideas of themselves, but may really be ideas projected onto them externally. Women are constantly comparing themselves to photographs, advertisements, magazines, characters in movies, etc. The system works, and I know this because I do the exact same thing every day. I appreciated one of the women in Berger's episode who said, "I have never consciously looked in the mirror and seen myself as I am. I always see the image that I want. When I see myself in the mirror, I have not thought of myself as naked. I have seen myself as nude. This is culture. This is beauty. You think the female body is beautiful. I am beautiful. I'm a beautiful object. If not, I have to do something about it." The women participating in this discussion were all of different generations, but the conditioning is the same. We have to be beautiful to be complete. What is interesting is the actual moments when you see your true reflection of yourself are so brief and lost in the chaos of your daily life. For example, you come across a reflection as you're walking down the street, or an unexpected mirror, or a truly candid photograph of yourself. But the moments of vulnerability or of your genuine self are so brief before the thoughts come flooding in. The judgment, the perception, the habit to quickly fix your hair or check to see if you have spinach in your teeth. We have to look perfect, but who are we looking perfect for? Laura Mulvey talks about visual pleasure. She talks about women as the image and men as the bearer of looks, specifically in relation to cinema. The magic of the Hollywood style at its best arose not exclusively, but in one important aspect, from its skilled and satisfying manipulation of visual pleasure. Cinema offers many possible pleasures, one of which is scopophilia, where looking at self is a source of pleasure, and also in return there is pleasure in being looked at. Mulvey explains how Freud associated scopophilia with taking people as objects, subjecting them to a controlling and curious gaze. The sexual imbalance is where pleasure in looking has been split between the active male part and the passive female part. The determining male gaze projects its fantasy on the female figure. The presence of women is an indispensable element of spectacle in normal narrative film, yet her visual presence tends to work against the development of the storyline, to freeze the floor of action in moments of erotic contemplation. This is what makes film different in its intrinsically voyeuristic form, from say a striptease, theater, show, etc. Mulvey talks about how cinema goes far beyond highlighting a woman's to-be-looked-atness. Cinema builds the way she is to be looked at into the spectacle itself. Film creates the world around us, but is worse than the nude paintings because we are so completely immersed into it. A modern medium with an outdated narrative. The only way to change the narrative is to allow the underrepresented voices to be heard, to allow their art to be seen, which relates back to the original Guerrilla Girls posters from their study. Often we find men in power display moral licensing, an effect that Malcolm Gladwell dives into in his podcast, Lady Vanishes. It's this idea that if they open the door to just let one person from a marginalized group slip in, they can close the door for the rest of us. It justifies not having the responsibility of making any more actual social change after they have done the bare minimum. For example, the Metropolitan Art Museum not having more than 5% of women in their works. In an interview with Tate, the Guerrilla Girls said, "Art is a record of culture, and the art doesn't look like the culture. When the art is told only through the works of the white males, that's not the history of who we are. You cannot tell the story of our culture without the voices of everyone in the culture. Otherwise, it's not history, just history of the powerful. You have to question what you see and think about what is not being shown. Why is it not being shown? How did this work get in front of me, and who allowed it to happen? The Gorilla Girl said, "It's really productive to provoke people to think about things." So hopefully I was able to provoke at least a singular thought in my presentation. Thank you for listening.